Today on Got It the Movies, we are going to review and analyze 1994's The Lion King. Stay tuned.
In the great circle of life.
Walt Disney Pictures presents its all-new 30-second full-length animated motion picture, The Lion King. He was born to rule.
This'll all be mine?
Everything the light touches.
But a shadow lies over the kingdom.
I will be king. Run away and never return.
If you ever come back, we'll kill ya!
Hey, kid, what's in you?
I don't want to talk about it.
He looks blue.
I'd say brownish gold.
No. I mean, he's depressed.
Anything we can do?
Not unless you can change the past.
He grew up hoping to leave his old life behind.
I know who you are. You're Mufasa's boy.
You're the king.
King? Have you got your lions crossed? You know my father?
Correction. I know your father.
He died a long time ago.
Nope. Wrong again. He's alive. And I'll show him to you.
Father?
You are my son, and the one true king.
You see, he lives in you.
You must take your place in the circle of life.
Simba!
It's a legendary tale filled with excitement, plus dozens of wonderful new characters.
Why do I always have to save you?
And featuring original music and songs by Grammy winner Elton John and Academy Award winner Tim Rice. Walt Disney Pictures presents an entertainment event you'll never forget.
Screen sharing has stopped. All right, everybody, welcome to God at the Movies. I am Vicar Chuck, and we are reviewing and analyzing The Lion King and looking at film and eventually television and the intersection of faith and Christianity and what we see in movies and in television and storytelling in general. I have two guests today, and Amanda and Brittany, and they're going to introduce themselves. So why don't you go first, Amanda? Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you, Chuck, and hello, everyone. I'm Amanda, and I live in Southern California, and I am a classmate at Wartburg Seminary with Chuck and Brittany, although I am not on campus this year. I am doing my internship year. And so was excited when Chuck had the invite to come talk about The Lion King. I thought that sounded like a fun idea. So here I am.
Thank you, Amanda. It's great to have you join us. And I haven't get to see you for a while now. And so it's good to see you on Zoom. But here we are. Brittany, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Brittany. I am currently in Apple Valley, Minnesota. I am a student at Wartburg with Chuck and Amanda, and it's my first year. Currently doing the distance learning program, so I am not on campus either. And I serve as the interim director of children's ministry at Grace Lutheran Church right now.
Awesome. And for those that don't know yet, I'm Vicar Chuck. I am a third year Wartburg Theological Seminary student, MDiv program. And I'm also the vicar here at a Tri-Point Parish in Northwest Wisconsin, in Colfax, Wisconsin, near Eau Claire. And I am super glad to be talking about The Lion King. And we're glad to have you join us today. So for those that are new to the channel, which most of you are, because we've only done, this will only be the third movie that we've analyzed, but basically what we do is we talk about movies, and we're going to talk about The Lion King and what themes that we see, whether they be spiritual or religious. Since we're all Christian here today, we typically look for Christian themes, and sometimes we'll discuss Lutheran themes in particular. Um, but we're not like trying to like say that there's only one way to interpret these films, and there isn't, and there's lots of applicability. But The Lion King is not an allegory; it's has a broad theme, and so we're going to do that and see what we see and how we view movies, and it's going to be a lot of fun. As you can see, I have this on because it's very cold here in Wisconsin and in, as Brittany knows, in Minnesota. It is the temperature as we are talking now here in Colfax is 11 below zero. That is the air temperature. And so I'm bundled up. The office here is just a little chilly, but it's okay. Amanda, on the other hand, is in nice sunny California. So
I'm not jealous at all about that.
But let's Amanda, when was the first time that you saw this? Do you remember the first time, and what was your reaction? What was your feeling, and how do you still feel about the movie?
Yeah, so I would have seen it in 1994 when it was released, or maybe, I don't know, was it released in 95? I know it's from 94, but
94 it was released. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I don't remember I don't remember the exact movie theater. I don't remember the exact moment, but I do remember I saw it with my husband Eric, and I remember us being amazed by the animation. It was at that time, I mean, it looked really just it kind of almost took your breath away. And it's funny watching that trailer again, particularly now when we think of the advancement of how we do animation and things. But that scene where the birds fly at the beginning in the circle of life, and I just remember it was one of the most beautiful things we had seen in terms of animation, and we were just in awe. And the storyline, right? And in fact, I'm sure that he and I talked about some of the things we might talk about today in terms of just some of the deeper themes that seem to come out of there. And then, but what also stuck with me, so I don't know if I would have been pregnant with our first daughter. She was born in 1995. And I just remember that was one of those movies that we knew that when it came out on video, this was before CDs or DVDs. I knew it was one we were going to have. That was a movie we thought our kids should know. And then of course I remember when a movie has really kind of landed for in your life when you make references to it, right? And so I remember when Anna, our oldest daughter, was born, Eric, definitely had his fun with holding her up and doing the Simba thing, which prior to that movie, we would never have done that, right? Or even just the random times where you just bust out with like Mufasa, just because it's fun to say that, or things like that. So, and of course the songs, right? I mean, Hakuna Matata and just all of it, Circle. I mean, we really enjoyed it. So my overall memory of my first kind of encounter with that movie is all just positive, very positive.
Awesome. That's great. What about you, Brittany?
Yeah, so I was a 90s kid, so I remember watching this. I can't remember exactly when I watched it or if I saw it in theaters, but I definitely remember wearing out the VHS tape quite a bit. So I remember the VHS tapes, or Disney was releasing all of them like out of the vault and stuff like that. So my mom would pick them up, and I mean, this was definitely one that she got right away. So I mean, my earliest memory of watching is probably watching a VHS. And yeah, I mean, I think the 90s were a great time to be a kid with just some of the movies that Disney was putting out. I mean, I loved Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid, Lion King, Aladdin, like so many good films. And yeah, I mean, that I watched Disney VHS tapes nonstop. Definitely had like the cassette tapes to listen to in the car with the soundtracks. Probably had like Lion King shirts and stuff like that. But yeah, it was definitely a favorite. And Amanda, like you said, the references. I mean, like there's something that you hold on to. And I mean, this movie is something that, I mean, everyone my age has seen. So you could just drop a reference and everybody knows what it is. Like if you say Mufasa and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a classic movie from my childhood that just never gets old. I watched it last night and like still know all the words to the songs, and like even when watching the trailer too, like the jokes still make me laugh even though I know they're coming. But yeah, it's definitely a good memory of my childhood.
Yeah, yeah. I don't remember. I must have seen it in the theater. I don't specifically remember, but I must have because I was a Disney freak. And when I was young, I mean, all the way through even early high school, I wanted to be a Disney animator. That was what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. And um I just happened to be at the age where the entire animation world was beginning to change, and by the time I was out of high school, I mean, Lion King, was kind of the last big film of like the Disney Renaissance, where they had this big comeback. And there were other movies. There was Pocahontas and Hunchback of Notre Dame, but Lion King was like the pinnacle. And after that, a few years, things really, I mean, animation, traditional hand drawn, hand painted animation began to kind of fade away, and computers were no longer just enhancing the film as it does in the Lion King. But it was, animation was beginning to be all computer generated, and I wasn't really interested in that. But that was my kind of my childhood dream. And so I definitely saw this. I'm sure I saw it multiple times in the theater. I'm sure I mean, I remember having the tape. I'm sure it's was worn out. And rewatching it, last night, um, I I had the like there's so much humor in it that like I certainly didn't get when I was 16 or 17 when this came out, or 18. How old was I? 94. So I would have been just 18 at the time. Like I didn't get like a lot of the references. I mean, obviously I got them a lot, but there are things in there, and we'll get to that, but there's a couple about classic movies from the 60s that I just now got, and only because I had only recently seen the movie that it references. And so it holds up. It holds up today, and it's not it's not my favorite Disney film, but it is artistically, it is most certainly, I think, at the pinnacle of what uh, the Disney Studios was able to do with traditional animation. And I don't know, I really wish we would have something like this again, and but the film has evolved and moved on, and so has animation. But yeah, I love the movie, and which is why we're here. So um,
Well, it's one of those movies that's still going strong, I feel like, with kids today. Like even small children are still watching it. So it's starting to become one of those movies that multiple generations know and love. And I mean, they've had things over time like the sequels and the Broadway musical and stuff, and that the remake of it that they did last year. But yeah, kids still watch this one, even though it was made before they were born and stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how it's watched over time.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question, because like some Disney movies don't necessarily hold up, even as classic as they are. Peter Pan is one. I mean, because they're, not, I don't, there are some really questionable scenes in like Peter Pan now, with the portrayal of Native Americans, which is absolutely hideous if you go back and watch Peter Pan now. And but Lion King doesn't really have that. I mean, it's got a few little things, little jokey things here and there, but like it holds up really well. And it was actually listening to the commentary, because I listened to the commentary for the Blu-ray today, and they were very ahead of their time. Like they were very alert and aware of the casting and trying to, obviously James Earl Jones is Mufasa, and they were aware that, they casted two white people, a kid, and then Matthew Broderick to play Simba. But they were very conscious of like trying to be inclusive in the casting and to be respectful of African, not only the landscape, but even like the color schemes were based on, according to the commentary, were based on like African dress and colors. And so it was pretty ahead of its time for 1994. And so it's kind of really cool that they took the time to do that. And
well, and that brings up an interesting point, because I was trying to look through a little different lens, but I feel like I would need to watch it again, being maybe more focused on that. But just in light of the systemic racism and everything that's come to light in recent times that we're really addressing now, I I couldn't help but think there's got to be some things in there like that, even though it was, like you said, ahead of its time. And they, but I was kind of looking for that somewhat, and yet nothing was really, I wasn't able to capture it. But part of it, like you, some of the humor and things like that, like with Timon, I'm like, oh, this was really funny. I found myself kind of just enjoying it and not really. So I would have to go back probably and look at that a little closer. But I was wondering about that. I was wondering, were there things that that now we would maybe kind of go, oh, I wondered about. I don't know if either of you picked up on anything.
yeah,
I've heard things about the hyenas. I know that's been one of the main critiques. And just like the way they were portrayed. I haven't looked into that as much. But yeah, that's the main one that I've kind of heard from Lion King. But I feel like I've heard a lot more things from other Disney movies compared to this one.
Yeah, there are little things here and there that I think that are problematic, and I don't want to gloss over them. But for what it did and for what it is, I really do. And I'm a white person, so what can I say? But I feel like it's one of the least problematic of the Disney movies. And there are things. Even Rafiki, the baboon. There's a little bit of like stereotypical that you could take away. But I think it overall, I feel like it does a pretty decent job. And it's sad that Disney does have this kind of long history of, some problematic issues, which I feel like they resolved really well with the remake in 2019. But I don't know that the remake as the CGI version has quite the impact that this one does. I don't know. So that's sort of a little bit of a side tangent. I didn't want to, don't want to dig too much into that, but I think it's important to address the issue and say that we're aware of like there are these little issues, and and maybe you're listening and you think it's not a little issue, and that's totally fine. Please, comment and say, you know what, no, there's a scene or there's a joke that I just find really offensive. I'm happy to hear that. Please don't don't want you to feel like that I'm like that we're like kind of downplaying it. But comparatively, Peter Pan, Dumbo, beloved movies, but boy, they're really problematic. And and so,
and that might be one of the reasons why this has endured so well. And like Brittany was saying, it's been a very well received as a musical on Broadway and the West End and all those places, right? I think it's still showing, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still on Broadway. Nothing's showing on Broadway right now, but yes, it is still.
I have never seen it, but I've heard it's fantastic.
Oh, it's so good. I saw it on New Year's Eve a couple years ago when it was in Chicago. And it's just like the puppets that they use and all the artwork. it's phenomenal. And the songs they added were great as well.
Yeah, and I think, and we're probably getting to this, and so this segues into probably where you were wanting to take us, Chuck, with more of some of the themes, right? And they are, I mean, these are themes that are speak right to the heart of life, you know, with restoration and hope, and you know, good, evil. I mean, all those things are kind of in it. So
Yeah, so I mean, and I thank you, Amanda, for like redirecting us here. I think again, it's important to address like the issues, and I don't want to ignore them, but I also don't want it to be just about that. Like we're, you know, clearly the movie is impactful and powerful, and as we've all said, kids love it today. I still love it. I think it's wonderful. I so enjoyed. My cat watched it with me. He sat laid right next to me and watched it, and or at least slept through it. But he was there, and it has that. What I got from it that I've never gotten before. It's been a while since I've like sat down and watched it, you know. And what I took from this is a call story, you know, from like a Christian point of view. This is a story of someone running from their call and uh, having to come to terms with what they are called to do. And in the commentary, they actually address that, like that a little bit. They talk about how obviously this has been influenced like a little bit by Hamlet, but also by the story of Moses and Joseph in you know, the Joseph and the Dreamcoat Joseph from the book of Genesis. And I had never, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And like as I watched it, I was like, yeah, this is a call story. And so that's my big takeaway from it. And I think for me, I identify with that pretty deeply because I ran from my call for a long time, and Amanda has heard some of this before, but it's a struggle to want to, you know, lots of people that are whatever they're called to in life, even if it's not, you're not called to be in ministry per se, whatever you feel like God is leading you to, lots of people struggle with that. They don't want to do it for maybe for good reasons or bad reasons. It doesn't matter. But I see that in this film, and that's my big takeaway from it. So do either of you have like a major takeaway, or just lots of different things that you noticed?
For me, yeah, it was a big thing with call and identity. And I think, yeah, a lot of people have had that experience where they are running from something that they are scared of. They don't want to admit. I mean, there's several seminary students that I know that have gone through that in their calls. I know myself personally ran from it for a while. And then you have the Rafikis of the world who hit you on that and say, shut up and listen, pretty much. The part that stood out to me too was, I think it was right after he talked to Rafiki, and his father appears in the sky and says like, remember who you are. And I mean, yeah, that reminds me of parts of the gospel and stuff.
Yeah, I didn't agree with all that. And I, you know, I'm obviously coming to seminary much later in life. And this is something I had thought about doing in college, and it never left me. And, you know, so here I am. So I think it sounds like we've all identified with that. And I love that you brought up Rafiki, Brittany, because for me, and I get a little crazy with movies, and so, you know, but I couldn't help but think in some ways at the beginning he felt a little bit like a John the Baptist figure, in the sense that he was, you know, presenting and all that, and then even later, you know, that he was pointing the way again, you know, when he was having him come back and know your father is, you know, and kind of that pointing the way. But like you said, who are the Rafikis in our lives that, you know, that had hit us on the head and kind of took to help to guide us maybe to where we are now. And I'm sure we can all identify some of those people who were voices in that time. So yeah, Chuck, definitely. Yeah, it is a call story. I also think for me, another big theme was just the restoration of all things. And what was really powerful for me was, so it starts off, you have this whole kind of sense of how good things are, right? And everything's in balance and whatnot. And then it all, you know, goes awry. And then you have that, just that barren, the very desolate. And then to the point where when he comes back, then, and everything is, but it's like that coming back to restore all things, right? Like this belief of God restoring all things, and the reconciliation, all of it, all coming back together. And he had Simba had the whole kind of false guilt that was laid on him, that it was his, and then all of that got reconciled. I mean, the whole piece. But I think living here, where I do, and we had some fires really close to us 2 years ago, and to drive and see everything parched and blackened by the charred, all over the hillsides here, and it just, I mean, it's just the worst feeling to see everything just dead. But then how glorious it was that first spring, because we live in kind of a high desert community, this area is, and so it's normal to have wildfires. And sometimes, in order for certain things to bloom, there has to be a fire. And then these things, these flowers that maybe you haven't seen in a long time, start to germinate. Well, anyway, that spring, we had the fires in the fall, and that spring of that following year, it was the most glorious, green, beautiful. I mean, it brought tears to your eyes. It was so beautiful. And so it took me right back to that when, when he goes back, and it's horrible, of course. But then, at the very end, and it's like this magic swipe on the screen, and everything turns green again. And it's like this, it's renewal, and it's, everything's been restored. And so I think, it's a message of hope. It's a message of restoration. And I think that's the Christian message too, right? I mean, it's, so that was, yeah, another big theme for me.
Yeah, I mean, all of that. Not only is it a call story, which resonated strongly with me, but as you said, there is this theme of uh, death and resurrection, right? And we get that early on in the film with the opening song, right? The Circle of Life, and um and the again, the famous scene where he holds up the baby Simba, and the audience goes, oh, I mean, he's so cute, like, and like you forget that it's like animation, because like you're so connected with like just the facial expressions, and we've all seen kittens, and so like there's all this like mental manipulation that's happening that the animators use, to trick us into believing that these characters are real. And I mean, one of the beautiful things about animation in particular is that you can do things that you can't do with live action. But aside from that, there's so after the opening scene, and we kind of start to get the backstory. um Simba is walking with Mufasa, and Mufasa is talking about the circle of life, and Simba says, the antelope run by, and Simba says, well, don't we eat the antelope? And Mufasa says, well, yes, we do eat the antelope, but then when we die, our bodies go back into the ground and become grass, and so they eat us. And so it's we are all things are interconnected. And uh, that is uh, that is a biblical message, regardless of what people might hear, or maybe poor interpretations of the scriptures or Christianity. That is a biblical message. We are all interconnected. We all are a part of creation. And what we do affects everyone around us, and affects the planet. And we are part of everything. The old saying, I'm paraphrasing, but there's an old saying that when we drink water, we are drinking the tears of Jesus, just because of the hydrogen cycle. And that's true, right? I mean, we are in an enclosed ecosystem, and so we are all interconnected, and not only on like the global planetary scale and the environment and God's creation, but also in the church. You know, what we do affects the rest of the church for good and for ill, you know, depending on what it is that we do. And so, I mean, to me, that's just a beautiful, beautiful message. And it's so true. And I feel like that as Christians, we've lost some of that understanding, perhaps. So, yeah, thoughts.
It felt like a timely message with Ash Wednesday coming up this week. Thinking
Right.
you are dust, and dust you shall return. When Simba and Mufasa were talking about, you know, them eating the antelope and stuff. That was one of the first things that popped into my head. And maybe it's because we're entering the season of Lent. But
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And along those lines, of course, even the marking on the head, and you know,
yes,
we think about being
baptism.
marked at our baptisms, right? But yeah, I was thinking that too, even with the ashes, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, but Chuck, yeah, I mean that's a huge, and you know, as you think about ways to, you know, if to show if you were showing this movie in a congregation, or you know, for youth or whatever, that's a great theme to pick out, because it's such a, well, it's a timeless theme, really, right? But that interconnectedness, that we more and more see how much everything is connected, and the importance of, you know, taking care of, what we do affects this thing, and that affects this. And you see that with the way Scar kind of mismanaged things, and you saw how it went. So it says a lot about, you know, you could do a lot of environmental discussions around that, but also with people. I mean, look what it did to the hyenas, right? And they ultimately obviously lost their allegiance to him. They were hungry, you know. So yeah, all that was good stuff. And there was one other thing, because you mentioned the dust. Well, maybe we'll get to it. Go ahead. But do you have another? I don't want to take us in a too weird of a rabbit hole.
Well, that's okay. Go rabbit hole away. I have more thoughts, but rabbit hole away.
Well, this is probably a big rabbit hole, so we'll go with your thought.
Oh, okay. Well, because I'm looking at my background right now, and I see Rafiki, the baboon, right? And I, like you were talking about the baptism, and he's kind of like John the Baptist, but he's an amalgamation of all these different types, these character types, right? I mean, we can get into the monomyth and Campbell, and you know, with you know, there's all these character types that we see in story. But he fits a whole lot of different ones. He's like the mentor. He's like a priest. You know, he goes there and anoints baby Simba. He's like, you know, he like kind of like baptism. He's John the Baptist. He points the way. He is in the commentary. They mention him as like Merlin to King Arthur. You know, and so that he's all these different things. And originally, in the director's commentary, they were discussing how originally he was going to be like a he was in like one of the early cuts a very proper kind of politician, and very refined, and right.
I can't even imagine that.
And it just didn't work. And so, and they said there wasn't enough of him, and it just didn't work. So then they had the actor, the voice actor, which I forget who it was, come back in and redo. And they said, well, we've completely changed your character now. Like, he's this wild shaman who's like amalgamation. He's like everything. And he's like your crazy uncle, but who's like wise, you know, he's all these different things. And so they reshaped the character, and it works, you know, because he is like, you think of John the Baptist and you think of, he's kind of like a wild guy, right? You know, you don't know what he's saying. He's like the wise monk. He's like Merlin. He's like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, living out in the desert, like this crazy old man that lives out in the desert, you know, Ben Kenobi. He's that character, and he fills that archetype. And it's just so much fun to see. And I just so appreciated this character rewatching this, because as you said, Amanda, we all have someone like him in our life, even if they weren't quite as so much of a character. Um, we have that person that points the way. And it was just a really interesting thing how the movie would not have worked if he had been like the politician,
Right.
So
yeah. Well, it's interesting that you were talking about Rafiki, because the rabbit hole I was going to go into was about him a little bit. So I noticed there are a few parallel scenes, I think. Again, I'd have to go back and watch it again now to see if this even makes sense. I'm not sure if you'll track with me on these scenes, but there was a scene, there's kind of a mystical element with Rafiki as well, right? And there's the scene where Simba is still away, at that, wherever the paradise area he's in, but where he went up, Nala had come back and he's kind of reconciling, do I go, do I not go back? When he goes up and he has that moment up and he's looking for his dad, and he kind of hits, and the dust flies through the air, and Rafiki, it comes to Rafiki, and then he's like, oh, and that's where he has that epiphany that, oh, he's coming, and he makes the mane around the little drawing and all that. Well, that scene where that particular dust is this moment of kind of hope from this dry dust, right? There was a similar scene, I'm pretty sure, when Scar and Simba were coming head to head, and the fire's going, and there's the coals, or what is it called?
The embers, yeah.
Embers, thank you. And I'm trying to remember the scene now. Was it that Scar did that and the embers went into Simba's eyes, or
yes.
Yeah, that ember.
Yeah. And so, but it was a similar using the pause and what came out, so and I don't know what we do with that, but I thought that was an interesting parallel. And I think there's something in there about maybe, I don't know. So
yeah, there's also and I thought this was in the movie. It shows how it's been a while since I watched it. But in the musical, there's a song called He Lives in You. And yeah, I was expecting it in the movie for whatever reason, but Rafiki sings it. And again, that just, it really draws out the concept of thinking back to those who guide you along the way. And I mean, I see God parallels present in that song too. But.
Yeah, that's so about that scene when Rafiki goes to find Simba, right? He's like, oh, Simba's alive, so he goes to find him, and he's in the grove, and he's in the tree bouncing around singing something squash banana, and Simba's like, go away, creepy monkey, and he can't get rid of him, and there's that line, and we saw it in the trailer, but there's that line where Rafiki says, oh no, Simba says, so you knew my father, and says, correction, I know
your father.
And then he says, come follow me, and then he leads him through the trees and the grove, and then he says, look down there, and he looks in, and there's the reflection, and Simba says, you're silly, that's just my reflection. And Rafiki says, look harder. And the way he says it, like, I won't even attempt, because like the acting is so good there. It's so powerful. And then he looks, and then he sees Mufasa, and when that scene happened, like, there's so many layers to that, right? Like, it's
almost like Imago Dei too, then, like, we are made in the image of God, if you're
yes, right,
you want to look at it that way too.
Absolutely. Well, that's where I was going. Like, there's so many levels to that. There's our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents, and people on back, but it's also like
of the saints, the communion of the saints.
Yes, exactly. And that's when Mufasa talks about the stars, and they're looking down, like it's the communion of the saints. The saints are watching us from, whatever dimension or however that works, which we don't know, but then there's he's in you, and it's like, look harder. And it's like, that's a great line, because look harder for I'm going to be very Christian now, for the Christ in yourself, but in everyone else. You know, if we say that we don't see God within ourselves, or I can't see God in that person, look harder. And oh, it's just such a, it's, you
Yeah.
know, such a great message. It's such a
Right.
great, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another thing that I saw, and I feel like we can't have this whole movie conversation unless we talk about Timon and Pumbaa, because they're great.
Yes.
I did some work with ELCA's Global Mission as a YAGM, and one of their big things in ELCA Global Mission is accompaniment. And I saw that present in how Timon and Pumbaa just basically take Simba in. They find him, and I mean, in reality, wouldn't you be terrified if a lion showed up who, you know, normally
Right.
would eat you? I feel like that would not be my first thought running through my head. It's like, oh, let's take a lion in. But yeah, I mean, they walk with him through his whole childhood. I mean, I know in Hakuna Matata, you see the time kind of move on and they skip a large chunk of time as he grows up, but they walk with him for such a long time and they don't care. I mean, they don't know that he was a king or anything. But then even after Nala points that out, they still just, I mean, see him, he's Simba. He's our friend, and we will walk with him along the whole way. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's that, you know, when they first see him, Simba, baby Simba, or child Simba, you know, laying there, and Timon, you know, is looking at like he's like, oh, he's like, ah, it's a lion. So he does freak out at first, and then Pumbaa is like, oh, but he's so cute. He's just a baby lion. Can't we keep him? And you know, so it's such a great, you know, and it's such a great moment. And then, you know, Pumbaa's like, plus, wouldn't it be great if if we were friends with the lion? And then Timon's like, you know what would be great? If he was on our side. Yeah.
I feel so bad for Pumbaa sometimes.
I know, he doesn't get
Timon can be a jerk.
But I hadn't thought about it as like accompaniment, but that is what is going on. Like, I was trying to discern, like, okay, so who are they? Like, if we're going to look at it in like a Christian or biblical perspective, who are they? Who are Timon and Pumbaa? And I kind of tossed about, are they like the disciples? But I'm not really sure. But go, Amanda.
I was kind of thinking about how in some ways they are all a little bit of outcast, in the sense that they're not living in the normal mainstream. They're all kind of, now, I mean, that might be a stretch because they're choosing kind of that Hakuna Matata lifestyle, right? Of just no worries, and we're just going to do this thing. And, you know, so that's not exactly maybe lining up with people that are, you know, maybe really suffering, because you don't get the sense that they're suffering. I mean, they're eating the worms and stuff, but they're like finding joy in it. You know, what was it? Slimy but satisfying, or
Yeah.
But there is something about, they're not, they were living kind of not within maybe the norms of what, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the norms of quote unquote society, you know.
Right. Right.
And but also the thing, it's just like they accept Simba for what he is, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, is that a good message, right?
Yes.
Like, and when they
And
find
Simba
out,
accepts them too.
he does, right? You know, and he knows they're silly and goofy, and he doesn't care. Like, he still loves them, and they find out he's a king, and like, there's that, you know, you know, Timon says, what does he say? Like, you must have your lions crossed, you know. It's like, this guy is king, like, or here, this guy right here is king.
Right.
And you know, but ultimately, like, there's the, you know, I don't want to necessarily take it too far because I don't think they really fit. I think they fit like what, like, being a good Christian is. Like, they're just there for their friend, you know? and they finally, when he's finally goes back, you know, he doesn't ask them to come, they come with him, they follow, and you know, they say, we're fighting for this. Yeah. It's just like, well,
Yeah, they're
real nice place here you got, you know, it's a
right.
fixer upper is what he says.
Right. Well, they're companions for the journey, right? And they're in it. They're in it, like you were saying, Brittany. You know, they're accompanying. They're not. They're committed, right? And they're, like you said, Chuck. We're a friend. This is, you know, and they'll show up if you're in need and all those things. Yeah. So something, it speaks to Christian community, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah. And before we get off, I want to talk about Scar, but before we get off the Timon and Pumbaa bandwagon for a moment, there's the scene. So like when they go back to Pride Rock and they're like going to try to take it back, like they're willing to die, you know, for Simba here, you know, and then he does the funny little dance. He's like, what do you want me to do? Dress up and, you know, sing a hula. And then like the next, it cuts. And then he's singing a hula and dancing, you know, and there's like, here's a pig and you can be a pig too. And then they run and the hyenas chase them. Just hilarious. It's a hilarious moment. But there's also the, like, you know, when they're kind of in the battle and then Timon runs into the cave and Zazu is in the rib cage and he's like, let me in, let me out. And the hyenas have him cornered. And then Pumbaa comes in and the hyenas turn around and go, who is that? And he's like, oh, it's a pig. And
Mr. Pig.
they call me Mr. Pig. And it wasn't until I watched it this time where I got the reference. In the Heat of the Night, the original In the Heat of the Night, where he says, they call me Mr. Tibbs. Like I've been my whole, because I just saw this in the original In Heat of the Night the last 6 months for the first time in my life. And I was like, great. But like, so there's these little gems in there that they just drop in and like, it's a funny line, but then you realize it's not just a funny line. It's referencing this groundbreaking movie from 66, 67, whenever that came out, about a black cop in the South. Like, I mean, it's like, whoa, like it's not just a funny line. There's other stuff going on here. But it is a hilarious line too. And it's great. And the way he delivers it, like it's awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, I didn't pick up on that, Chuck, and that's really neat. But what I did pick up on was those two scenes that you just mentioned, because in the first one, you got the sense that they were a little timid. They certainly are hamming it up, the comedians, but they run away at the end of it, right? And then you have this other scene where it's like the courage, right? I mean, there was a righteous anger, right? And he stepped in. And so I thought that was kind of, you know, as we think about in our faith, the times that, you know, we might be called to action in terms of stepping into things that are difficult, and yet doing it in a courageous way and not running away. And yet we can probably think of times we have run away, metaphorically, right? And that's kind of what happened in that first scene. You know, they were there, and then of course they were a diversion. That was the point of that. But you know, and I'm sure reading a lot more into this, but those two scenes were striking because you saw two different parts of Pumbaa come out. You know, the first one of there to do their thing, but then we're out of there. And then the second one, just all in. And I'm here, and what you said's not okay, and here's why, you know. and he was really present.
Yeah. And so let's talk about Scar, because we haven't really talked about him yet. Let's talk about, first of all, Jeremy Irons is brilliant. Like, I mean, can we just say that he is such a brilliant actor? And in the commentary, I listened to, like I said, I listened to the commentary, and he was very skeptical about doing an animated movie originally. And so they had him do some recording, and then they did some rough animation for him so he could see what it would look like. Uh, because he felt like his the way I'm remembering they were talking about, he worried about facial expressions, so much a part of how he acts. And when he saw the rough animation, he was completely sold, and so he's like, I'm on board. So and so he just nails it. But what about the character Scar, right? First of all, I mean, it's an old joke now, but what an unfortunate name. Like, is that his nickname? Is it like clearly because he has a scar, but that's kind of mean. Um, but what about this character? I mean, he's at first he just seems dissatisfied, and I don't, at least when I first saw it, I didn't realize he was going to be like evil, like to the level that he is, until that moment where, like, when the first time I saw it, because I remember this specifically, when Mufasa rescues Simba and he's climbing up, and he says, "Help me, brother." And Scar sits there and looks, and then he like reaches down and claws him, and I'm like, he's actually going to save him, and then he doesn't. And I was like, oh, it blew my mind. I was like, oh my goodness, like he's not just a disgruntled younger brother, like he's really messed up. So thoughts on Scar? Like, what do you think about this character? What's wrong with him?
Well, the thing that kind of shocked me watching it this time around, I mean, as someone who has gone through mental health issues and stuff, the way he emotionally manipulates Simba, like after
Oh,
Mufasa dies, and said, what have you done? And yeah, that just like, how on earth do you do that to someone? But yeah, I was not not really aware as a kid of the psychological impacts that would have on a person. But yeah, the way he manipulates people. I mean, he did that with Simba. He did that with the hyenas.
Yes.
Like,
yes,
really twisted.
yeah. And I think what stuck out for me too was even before that, when it was almost like Jesus being tempted in the desert, right? And that temptation to be powerful, to be, you know, because remember he said, when the ego piece was so big for Simba, when he knew his dad had just told him he's going to be king, and he's still the little cub, and so he's a little big for his britches, and went to the elephant graveyard with Nala, and that's when Scar kind of sees his opportunity, right, to be manipulative, right? But he comes in, and it was like, there, the setting was like being in the desert, right? It was being in this very desolate place, and he was alone, and he just kind of starts circling him, and kind of enticing him about, well, being the bravest, don't you, well, only the bravest will go, where was it he was gonna, oh yeah,
elephant graveyard.
oh, it was before that, yeah, but only the bravest go there,
Right.
that kind of thing. And so there was this kind of, that that temptation to be powerful, or to be, so I was seeing a parallel there, which then put Scar in the seat of like the the adversary, the Satan, that which in some ways you could pull that thread through, and probably, right, I mean, in terms of um and even the way kind of how he's portrayed, just, I mean, just the shadows and things. But that was one thing that did come up for me, and this circles back to our beginning conversation of the light and the darkness or whatever. You do see that happening, and yet, yeah, then there's also that piece that I know we're a little more sensitive now to how we talk about those things, right? So that was an interesting point. But if you do look at the cinematography or animation or whatever you want to call it, there were definite scenes that when Scar was there, if you look at the way it was portrayed, it was desolate. It was shadows, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, even the way it's lit,
Yeah.
yeah, and I don't think it's too far at all to like see Scar as like the Christian idea of Satan, or the he'd rather rule over the ashes of nothing than serve in heaven. that sort of a idea, and he does, and it's but there's also like not just. I think for sometimes I think it's too easy to just say, oh, this character is like the devil. Like it's just too easy. But it's clearly there. But I also like it's also the idea that like what he seeks more than anything is power for the sake of power. Right? I mean, he doesn't really care about the hyenas. He doesn't care that everybody's starving. And even towards the end, when Sarabi comes to him and says, there's no food left. We're going to starve. And he says, well, then we're all going to starve. We're not going to move on.
Yeah.
This is our fate. Like he is, because it questions his power, it questions his authority, and he'd rather be in a position of power, even if it leads to his ultimate demise, which it does. And I mean, that's a message that, because I mean, was he always bad? Like I mean, clearly Mufasa sees something in him. So clearly not. He wasn't always this way, or at least Mufasa believed there was some good in him, because otherwise, why keep him around? Like,
I would love to see a prequel where they have Mufasa and Scar growing up. Like,
yeah,
where does it go wrong?
Yeah.
I feel like something happened between them. There was always that tension, and
yeah. I mean, no, it would be really interesting if done well. The problem is generally when we get those prequels, they're not very good.
Yep.
That's the problem.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, so that's how I see Scar. Like I see him as a character that wasn't always quite as bad as he is. But just something went wrong. And, by the time he is in that spiral, like he's lost it. Like at the end, like he's lost it. Like he's no longer sane by the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
He is now insane. I mean, he's willing to do anything. And so like he descends into madness in a way. And I don't know. It's just a really interesting. It's an interesting character, which is again just done so well by Jeremy Irons. I mean, that's the one. I mean, I don't really want to focus on the remake, but I was really disappointed that he wasn't the voice of Scar in the CGI version, because it was tough to imagine, because they brought in James Earl Jones, and I get Jeremy Irons is a white guy, but it was hard to have Scar be any other voice than him, because he's so good at it. He captures the character so well. So
I still haven't watched that CGI version. I meant to. I just haven't.
It's good. It's good. Like it's not as good as, I don't think it's as well done as this. But I enjoyed it. They go for the photorealistic, quote unquote, photorealistic CGI, which I think is the marvel of it, but it's also, I think, a little bit of its downfall, because you don't quite get the emotion that you get in traditional animation. But it's good. I very much enjoyed it when I watched it. Yeah, so it's good, but it doesn't, again, the beauty of traditional animation is you can do things that with animals that you can't do if you're trying to be realistic with them. Eyes and facial expressions and all that. So
there was one thing that I wanted to just bring up. I had taken some notes yesterday when I was watching it again, and I just thought this was really beautiful, and just, I don't know, it moved me. But when Mufasa died, and so when the wildebeest came and there was the stampede, and if you recall, Simba was hanging from that little tree, that was kind of a deadened tree, and he's hanging there. And then all that happens, and he is climbing up and all that. But at the very end scene where they zoom out and the wildebeest have gone. Did you notice how he died? The spot he died was right under that same tree.
I did not notice that, but
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Ugh.
And so it, if you hadn't caught the message before, it definitely brought it home of the sacrificial nature of, that
Mhm.
he died for, in how Simba was stuck in that spot, and that's the very spot that he died. So, that's kind of putting Mufasa more like also a Christ figure, or however you want to say that,
Yeah.
but this idea of meeting us in our suffering. So there you have um, Simba. So really, theology of the cross is, I guess, what I'm saying, to bring it, to
Mhm.
give a little Lutheran spin there too. But that
Yeah.
idea of, you know, that moment happened right in Simba's
Ye-
biggest
ye-
need.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, particularly as with baby or young Simba, cub Simba, like, I mean, Mufasa is very much like a Jesus figure. Um, and Simba is the disciple, the student. And yeah, I had not noticed that. That's an amazing observation. And I mean, yeah, I mean, it's pretty blatant. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty blatant. Like, the tree, the cross. He
Yeah.
sacrificed himself to save someone
Mhm.
else.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, it's not an allegory, but I mean, I mean, it's the theme and the symbolism is there. Um, this is not Chronicles of Narnia. Like, Mufasa is literally not Jesus, but nor is Simba, but there's all of these similarities. And um yeah, no, that's an amazing. I now I want to go back and watch that just to see that. That's great.
Yeah.
um Yeah, and so I'd like to like close out before we sign off, but just kind of talk about this idea again of resurrection and what we see, and like let's tie it with call again, because I think that's, again, for me, that's what stuck out the most. And in this with Simba, he has to go away to find himself, right? To remember who, and there's that line, and when he, Mufasa, the spiritual Mufasa comes to him in the clouds and says, remember who you are.
Mhm.
And um there's that. It's I mean, it's the temptation in the desert. Jesus goes off into the desert for 40 days to be alone. Jesus goes on the mountains to pray alone, but it's also Moses going out, escaping Egypt. It's, Joseph, it's Jonah. Like, and there's all these similarities from all these biblical figures. Even St. Paul writes about how, like, he went to Arabia for like 3 years and like just disappears and then comes back and starts preaching the gospel. Like, so there's this idea of like, you people called very often have to go away to find who they really are, or to remember who they really are.
Yeah. And what I thought was interesting is it's again Rafiki, and I had written this down. Rafiki said right before Simba was coming back, he said, "It is time."
Mhm.
That it is time.
Hmm.
So what is that kind of Kairos moment or whatever it is where we know, like, okay, I can do no other, or okay, here I
Yeah.
am, send me,
Yep.
because that would be a connection point for all of us, for any of us, right?
Mhm.
That moment of, okay, here I am, I'll show up, and but there is that moment. So I just think it's interesting that it's Rafiki. So we didn't talk about this, but again, I'm taking real huge liberties, but there's a spirit element of Rafiki, right? And
Mhm.
so that kind of,
Yes.
Holy Spirit kind of thing
Mm,
too. And it
that's what
was
I was gonna
Rafiki
say.
that said, it's time. It's
Yeah.
time, you know. And
Absolutely.
remember, he was there at the beginning when he did the marking, if we want to relate that to the baptism, right? Holy Spirit, So I mean, it's just kind of like he's always been there,
The
and
spirit is always working.
yeah.
Yeah, no, totally, totally. I mean, I thought about that too. That he's kind of like the Holy Spirit, like Rafiki just shows up
Yeah.
and beats you over the head with a stick, like he does with
That was the most relatable part when he was getting beat over the head with a stick.
you know.
We all had a Rafiki that did that to us. It's like, listen.
And there's the line, where he says, like Simba goes, "Ow," and Rafiki says, "Oh, don't worry, it's in the past." And he's like, "Yeah, but it still hurts." He's like, "Yeah, the past can hurt."
Mm.
And that's Simba's like wake up moment, like, oh, I'm getting in this now.
And then remember he went to hit him again, and that time he moved, and he
Yeah,
said that he learned,
you've learned.
Oh, yeah.
from the past.
Learn from the past. Yes, yeah.
Well, I think ultimately that kind of sense of call story, I think that's what's kept this movie so relatable for so long, because we've all had that experience, whether that's in ministry or not.
Mhm.
People have had that in some capacity. I think that's what keeps it real and what keeps people coming back to it.
Yeah, and even for people that are not religious in any way, like they have these experiences of feeling drawn to do something, being afraid, wanting to do it, but not knowing if they can, or even forgetting who they are, which is like another layer here. Like that Simba, like, he's trying to bury who he is for shame because he was mentally abused by his uncle, like, and he's terrible, manipulated in this terrible way, like guilt, like you want to forget that, but we have to confront it to heal. I mean, perhaps it's necessary to run from it for a time, but eventually, if we're going to step forward and heal as human beings, we have to confront whatever it is that we are running from. And Simba finally does and takes his place back on the top of Pride Rock. So,
Yeah, and I think that one scene, we haven't mentioned it, but it's just such a powerful image. I keep thinking of it where he was still a cub following his dad, and there was the footprint
oh,
of Mufasa, and he puts his little paw there, and he's kind of like that ego piece is starting to kind of go, oh, he was just so, and then it was like, oh, I don't know if I can do this, you
mhm,
know, which brings up like the self doubt you were talking about. That is a universal thing, and I think that's the thing. If we were looking through this from other religious traditions too, I'm sure that there are so many rich, you know, takings, gleanings that would be totally taken in those ways too, right? Because these are such
absolutely.
universal themes. And for, as you were saying, Brittany, for people who are, I think Chuck, whoever it was about, for anyone, if you're not, I mean, this is the human experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I just say it relates. It's relatable for people of all ages. And that's the thing. I mean, kids clearly relate to this film, and but I mean, it sticks with you from a young age, and yeah, there's something here that in one of Disney's masterpieces, and it is a masterpiece. Um, and like again, the pinnacle of the Disney Renaissance, which began with Little Mermaid and kind of reaches its pinnacle, obviously with Beauty and the Beast because it was the first and only film, animated movie ever nominated for true Best Picture, until they created a category because they didn't want that to happen anymore. But we can't have animated movies being Best Picture. Come on, we got to change things. But this is really the pinnacle of that, and yeah, and like I think we could go on all night. But one other thing I want to just talk about is the music, which we kind of mentioned, but the music is so good. It's so good. Like Elton John and like the African music and the style, like it's so good. Like when you go there, and Amanda, you mentioned this at the very beginning, and I think it's a good, like, way to like kind of close this discussion is that when you saw it in the theater, you like the birds, coming over the Serengeti, like the opening scene, you are there, right? You're there, and you're not in Kansas anymore, to borrow from another movie. But you're not. You're in Africa, and it's so real and so authentic, and they did so much research. And I watched the credits, and like there was like the animal something education for animals, like, oh, they brought in so many experts to consult on this, and they went to Africa, and they took photos and video, and like they wanted it to be as respectful and as authentic as they could make it. I mean, given the time, 1994, again, like it wasn't quite as woke as like we remember, but it's, I mean, you're there in a different place, and it's so believable. And that's, I think, one of the, and you're there until the end. Like there isn't, for me, there was not a moment where I'm breaking away and thinking, of something else. Like I'm captured by this story, and I was when I rewatched it. And I thought I was going to do some couple little things on the side, and 10 minutes in, I'm not doing anything. I am engrossed. I am there, and I couldn't look away. So I think that's a sign of a great piece of art and great storytelling, but just on all levels, and how much this movie has persisted and lasted enough that they, you know, you know, what is the saying? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So like they imitated themselves with the CGI version because this movie is so beloved, and so I think that's a testament to its longevity.
I mean, the crazy thing about this movie, as someone who was a child when it came out, is just like, yeah, how it sticks with you. I was captivated when I was a 5-year-old watching the TV when my mom popped in the VHS, and I was captivated last night as a 25-year-old sitting on a couch watching it. I mean, it just, yeah, you see new things each time. And I mean, as a young child, I did not understand, all the things that we were talking about tonight, but it was still relatable in some way, and it's still relatable now. And I think Disney's way of storytelling just, yeah, does that perfectly. It draws you in no matter how old you are. And just thinking about how I've watched it over time just is a really cool thing to carry with me.
Yeah. Amanda, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's I like you when I saw it last night. Yeah, I'm amazed at how quickly I was drawn right back in, um, and yeah, I think it's a real timeless story. And there's, as we showed just in our discussion this evening, that there's so much you can harvest from it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we could go on a very long time, I'm sure, but I think we'll sign off. And I just want to thank you both for doing this, for joining me, for talking about The Lion King. This was so much fun. When I pulled out the movie, I was like, I've seen this so many times. Am I going to enjoy it again? And I was right. That opening, and I called it a hymn, right? Because it kind of is. It's like the gathering hymn in worship. And that opening song, like I was there and I was sold, and it stands up so well today.
Why did they not put that in All Creation Saints? Come on now.
Right. That should be in the new hymnal, right? Absolutely. And it is the circle of life, and the life and death, and out of that comes resurrection. Whether you're a Christian that believes that Jesus has risen from the dead and is risen, or whether you're not, these themes are very universal, and we've all experienced them, and it's just so much fun to discuss and talk about, and to view it through our lens as Christians and as Lutherans. And I thank you both for joining us, joining me and discussing The Lion King. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Brittany.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
thank you to everyone for joining God at the Movies, and join us next time, and we'll be doing another one soon. So until then, I'm Vicar Chuck for God at the Movies, and I will see you soon.